So first of all, I just kind of like to thank you for all of your work, and then several other people contributed quite a lot to the project. Jeannie Meyer over there, Jeannie, whose video is working. Unfortunately, maybe she can't. Oh, poor Jeannie.
Hi.
We can hear you, Jeannie. It's working.
Oh, you can?
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
good.
Oh, after all that stress, she's here. So Jeannie fell in love with the project, and she sent in, whenever it was a destination she knew, she would send in ideas, her memories, and wonderful, vivid descriptions of various places that are included in the book. And so her personality comes out in a number of the stories, and we're going to maybe hear a little bit more about one in particular in a little while. And other people who are here who had played a part. We also have Karen here, but I think we had a few other of the proofreaders. So Karen proofread my first book, and so she's back here on the second book. And in addition to helping with the proofreading, Karen helped me help inspire a story. So Karen, I'm not sure if you've gotten to it yet.
I was just looking at it right now and I'm about ready to cry. I was like, oh, it's awesome. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So Karen had suggested at the beginning of the project the Butte Chaumont Park, which is in the 19th district. So it's in the 19th story. And I've been waiting. She kept going, where's my story? And in the end, I've named a character after her. So I hope you like her. So.
And there's firefighters, and I was really excited to see that.
Yes.
So yeah.
So the famous Paris firefighters and their little cute jogging shorts. So, I've lived in Paris for 20 years now, and so I know the city very well. So I tried to show kind of real Paris, but also kind of make the stories interesting for people who live here, but then make the stories also engaging and interesting for people anywhere around the world. And we have someone from Zimbabwe. Tarzan just popped in from Zimbabwe. Bonjour, Gary Lee's here. He follows the blog. So a great number of people are here. And I was going to say, so I would like to toast to you all. So, oh, great. We've got lots of things we're
Salud.
to. Salud. Chin, santé. Yeah, thank you. But this may look like champagne, but it's not. Any guesses what it might be instead of champagne? It should be served in this.
Cider.
And Josh knows that from going to Creperie. But not only that, if people have gotten to story number 15, they're going to know that this is a little joke about that story. Hello, Ella, I see you there in the background. Because there's a bit of tragedy when cheers, Steph, thank you. When the character is served this funny looking bowl and thinks she was getting champagne or something akin to that. So cheers to you all. I'll take a little sip. This is farmer cider from Normandy that I got last year, and it's been sitting here. And I thought, well, no occasion like the present. So with no kind of further ado, I'd like to do a small reading from the book, but then I'm going to call on two people to do a special reading. So I do hope that you enjoy this reading, and cheers, Jennifer. Thank you for popping in and cheersing. So the final book had a bit of a surprise. So as you, those of you who are following along, cheers, Pascal. Those of you who are following along do know that there were these stories. There's one per arrondissement in Paris. However, I added another little element to it. And that was this kind of exciting chase in the metro. And so if you finish the book, you know what happens, and I'm not going to give anything away, but as you're reading and going along, you will discover this. And so I'm not going to read all of the first chapter. So it opens with this kind of man jumping on the metro. And so I'm not going to read it all, because I'm actually going to start reading more excerpts on Facebook Live. And so to kind of tease you and interest you in the book and help keep it living for you, just little excerpts, because you need to read the book to find out what happens in each story. So, of course, bien sûr. So we're going to hop onto the metro right now. And hi, Lachlan, nice to see you. We're over there in Hawaii. We're all very jealous. But nice to see you. Lachlan has followed along the project and contributed along the way too. So thank you for joining us. A certain man jumps on the metro. His name is Sasha. And he's on the phone, and he's trying to hear what the person on the phone is saying, but he has this loud accordion player playing in the background, and he's really quite annoyed. And she's singing a song, and the song is called "There's Only One Paris." And so this is the theme that comes up throughout the metro sections. And of course, that's the theme of the book. But I thought I would read this little passage where he kind of delves into what that really means. So the singer says, "There's only one Paris," she belted out once again. Sasha was trying to concentrate on his call, but he was getting increasingly annoyed by the musical distraction. Il y a qu'un seul Paris. Sure, there's only one city in the world like Paris, Sasha reflected on the lyrics of her song, but there are many Parises within the city. He possibly knew this better than anyone. He wasn't simply considering the city's 20 arrondissements, its administrative districts. Each of these had its own distinct personality. But beyond these larger borders, each arrondissement had a multitude of sub-districts, its quartiers, or neighborhoods. Within these were a myriad of specific places, from historic sites to colorful markets, and from local cafes to picturesque parks, which also influenced that neighborhood spirit. Then there were the types of people found in each quartier. Its residents, other Parisians or foreigners passing through. In the middle of all of this was the Seine River, much more than a mere border between the left and right banks. Finally, there was Paris's extensive metro system, where Sasha currently found himself. It had a whole life of its own. The sum of all of these individual components made up this one and only Paris. But how were these very strange times, with a worldwide pandemic, affecting Paris? What were the short and long-term repercussions of the virus? Besides the effects of the current state of the world, Paris was also changing in so many ways, and at a rapid pace. Would the city always be this one and only Paris? So that's sort of the theme that comes up along in the stories in various ways, slightly sometimes a little more apparent. And so I'm going to read a few of my favorite passages, but also ones that I thought would be a little livelier for you without giving too much away. So I'm going to hop to chapter 2, which is actually one of my favorite stories in the book. And then afterwards, let's hear what your favorite stories are so far. But it is called In Search of Lost Time at the Palais Royal and the Gallery Vivienne. And so some of you might remember this is one of the stories that I created near the beginning of the project, and the Palais Royal is a beautiful garden. I'm just going to skip to the second page of the story on the top of page 33, where it starts with 5 steps. So this elderly woman has walked into the park. She's walked to the park and arrived into this beautiful park, which is the Palais Royal Gardens. And so this is where we're picking up from. 5 steps from her destination, suddenly Capucine froze. There was something seriously wrong. There was someone on her bench. She stood there, as rigid as the manicured trees which lined the garden. Her already squinting eyes were reduced to tiny arrow-hole slits through which she was launching a barrage of evil eyes. Her defensive efforts seemed to have absolutely no effect on the abominable invader. After what seemed like an eternity, the intruder finally noticed Capucine. "Bonjour, madame," he greeted cheerfully. Capucine intensified her war stance. "Would you like to take a seat?" suggested the young man, looking over at the rest of the bench. There was clearly ample room on it for this little old lady, much more than the meter required with the new social distancing rules. Nevertheless, he slid over to the very edge of the bench and made a Vanna White gesture, matched with an equally gleaming smile over at the vast space available to her. Capucine didn't budge. "What a lovely day," he said as he loudly inhaled the crisp morning air. "The park is splendid in autumn, don't you think?" No, Capucine thought. It isn't splendid at all with this obtrusive man on my bench. "I almost prefer the park at this time of year," he continued nonchalantly. "Springtime is also nice. However, in the past few years, the magnolia blossoms have been attracting way too many people." "I couldn't agree more." The statement popped out of her mouth before she realized what had happened. She couldn't consort with the enemy. What's the point of taking all those photographs when you can sit here on this lovely bench and simply savor their beauty? He said with another wave of his arm, this time up in the air from his seated vantage point. Capucine couldn't help but follow his gesture up towards those magnolia branches. It was true. Her bench was perfectly positioned to enjoy them, and actually the whole north end of the park. Capucine scrunched up her toes. Even if she was just going through the park, she still wore her pumps. She was only meant to walk 262 steps. Then she would be sitting down. Standing on these uneven pebbles was not part of her usual routine. She took a few steps forward in order to relieve her cramped toes. "Have you noticed that the leaves on the chestnut trees are starting to turn?" he went on, pointing up to the branches. Seemingly oblivious to Capucine's displeasure and discomfort, she turned around to check, but with her bad knees, she wasn't able to crouch down enough to get the right angle. She had no choice but to sit down on the bench so she could see what he was referring to. "No, those aren't chestnut trees. They're lindens," she corrected. "Oh, okay. Thank you," he said without acknowledging Capucine had finally sat down next to him. "I grew up in an apartment, so I don't know my trees very well." "So did I, but it's something one can learn," she said curtly. "Yes, that's true," he replied thoughtfully. "Like the saying goes, we can learn something new every day." "I suppose so, but once you pass 80, those little details don't seem to matter much anymore." "80? But madame, you don't look a day over 65. He proclaimed sincerely. She pretended not to be flattered. However, her glacial frown was defrosting and her dagger eyes had retreated. My name's Luca. He took the liberty of introducing himself. Luca? She questioned. I assumed your name would be different. Born and raised in la région parisienne, Madame Dubois. Madame Dubois, enchantée. It's a pleasure to meet you. Well, at least he had good manners despite growing up in the suburbs, Capucine thought to herself. Do you work in a restaurant around here or something? She asked, nodding her head in the direction of the 2 Michelin-starred establishments on the north side of the park. No. I'm quite fond of Le Grand Véfour, but I don't work in the restaurant business. I actually run a bookshop. You run a bookshop? She said, surprised yet trying not to seem too interested. Yes. It's nearby. I needed some fresh air, so I came to the park for a short break. Which bookshop? She quizzed. I've lived here in the district since long before you were born, in la région parisienne. You'll surely know it then, replied Luca. À la recherche du temps perdu. The bookshop at the end of the Galerie Vivienne. À la recherche du temps perdu, she added after a moment of silence. Capucine turned her gaze back to the garden. À la recherche du temps perdu, in search of lost time. That's what Capucine now spent most of her days doing. So if you finish that chapter, it's quite a touching one. And we visit the bookshop several times during the other chapters. I'm not sure if you picked up on that, because there are these little connections between the stories without it being too heavy, but here and there. So, and perhaps you've been to the Galerie Vivienne and have seen that bookshop. So I'm going to jump forward and I'm going to read one more passage and then we're going to pass it over to a special guest. But this time we're fast forwarding to story number 16, which is Crazy Times at the Castel Béranger. And it's on page 269. So if you've ever been over to the 16th district of Paris, it's really quite posh. It's probably the poshest district if we talk about a global district of one place. And it's a newer district of Paris, though, and a lot of it was built in the mid to late 19th century, especially late 19th century, when a lot of Art Nouveau buildings were put in the area. And so Castel Béranger is one of these. Dingue, complètement dingue. Man, that's one crazy looking place, thought Sacco. He was standing on the sidewalk, gawking up at the designated address. He'd never seen a building quite like it. Even though it was nighttime, the lamplight provided just enough illumination so he was able to see that the building was made of red and beige brick. That was weird in itself, considering that the majority of Paris buildings were made of stone. Materials aside, it was the decorative features on this particular structure that were downright wacky. Around the windows, and especially on the main door, there was the quirkiest ironwork. To Sacco, it seemed as if the designer had let his pen go wild on his drafting papers. Actually, the more he looked at it, the more it reminded him of something else in Paris, yet he couldn't quite put his finger on what. Rich nutcases, he grumbled, shaking his head. He looked back down on his phone. Yes, it was indeed the right address. He punched in the door code included in the information he'd been given and pushed open the funky door. The foyer was even stranger than the exterior. He'd never done any hallucinogenic drugs, but this was the sort of place he figured people on a trip might envision. Everything looked like it was moving, courtesy of the same undulating pale green ironwork that Sacco had observed on the facade. Its movement compelled your eyes to follow it up to the arched ceiling. Was it made of copper? The walls were also sculpted with curvaceous motifs. Possibly flowers? It was hard to tell, but Sacco was sure of one thing, though, that he wanted to be in and out of there as fast as possible. It was that crazy. He went over to the intercom and pushed the button marked RVV as indicated in his notes. It was one of those high-tech systems with a video camera. This new technology didn't quite fit in with this old building, which Sacco figured must be at least 100 years old. "Montez au sixième," ordered a rushed voice through the speaker. This was followed by a long buzz, indicating that the lock of the interior glass door had been released and he could enter. "Go up to the 6th floor," Sacco repeated mockingly. Can't even come down and get it. These darn rich folk can't even make any effort, can they? He went on complaining as he proceeded inside. He stopped his griping when he saw that there was at least an elevator. That convenience would help get him in and out faster. An old-fashioned metal cage lift, it slowly chugged upwards. Along the way, Sacco noticed more of those psychedelic decorative flowers, as well as stained glass windows in between each floor. He actually kind of liked those. Arriving on the 6th floor, the elevator doors squeaked open and he stepped out. He looked down the sage-colored hallway. There were only 2 doors, which were directly opposite each other. One of these was slightly ajar. That must be it, reckoned Sacco. He took the package out of his bag and leaned down to set it on the doormat. Following the new COVID policy of no direct contact. Just then, the door swung open and a slender hand reached out and yanked him inside, slamming the door behind him. "Hey, what the?" The twin to the kidnapped hand covered his mouth to stifle his protests. "Shh," his abductor hissed. So we'll leave it there so that you can pick that up later. Perhaps you know what has happened, perhaps not, but Sacco was not expecting a little adventure during his stop in at the Castel Bernardino. So we're going to pass over the reading. We're going to do just a few more brief readings. Vero, thank you for joining us. Veronique, nice to see you over there. And then we have Jeannie. Thank you for coming in, Jeannie. And we have Jennifer. Thanks for joining us too. So we're going to carry on the reading, but I would like to pass the reading over to Susan, who's disappeared. Susan, there we go. So for those of you joining us, Susan was the editor of the book. So Susan put a lot of time into the book, and so I asked her to choose one of her favorite passages and to do a little reading for us. So over to you, Susan.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. My reading is on page 234. It's from the Out of the Oven into the Streets of the Bell, of that section.
Budokai.
Thank you very much. And this is a little girl that was, well, she's not little, she's in college, found by the baker. And they're having a little chat. She failed a test and was afraid of what her parents might say. That's kind of it. "What is it you really want to do?" he asked. "Actually, I love my parents' tea shop. Ever since I was a kid, I spent hours after school browsing the aisles, examining all the exotic labels, trying to connect the Mandarin characters to the words my parents spoke. I would eavesdrop on their conversations with regular clients, little old ladies who would shuttle in with their large grocery trolleys on their way back home from the Chinese supermarkets. When Mom and Dad weren't looking, I'd carefully pick up the delicate teacups off the shelf and make up stories about the miniature scenes of the distant China that decorated them. This year hasn't been very easy for them. Even before having to close for the 2-month lockdown, sales were down because some people feared we might have COVID just because we're Chinese. However, things are slowly bouncing back. My parents have worked hard. I'd love to keep their legacy going, but I'd also like to create more of a bridge between my family's heritage and the country which hosted them, my country."
Aw, thank you, Susan, and that's a lovely passage that you chose to read. And I tried to showcase every walk of life here in Paris, and we just saw two separate characters. And this lovely young woman is a little bit inspired by the daughter-in-law of a friend of mine too, so who lives down around there. So sometimes these characters were inspired by real people, sometimes they were completely imaginary. So I'm glad that you like that story. That's the 13th, in the 13th. So I'd like to pass things over to Jeannie now. And so, as I mentioned before, Jeannie had really gotten involved in the project, and I appreciate everyone who sent in their ideas. Dave and Grace sent in things. Lachlan did. I'm just thinking people who are here, and it's just chimed in along the way, and I think I really appreciate that. But Jeannie went the extra mile and would just send me these lovely passages which inspired some of the stories, and they more than inspired one story in particular, and that's the third story, where Jeannie had sent me a request to have a story on her favorite shop in Paris. And so let's let Jeannie she's chosen a passage, and so what page is that on, Jeannie?
I'm going to start on page 53 with the character of Jane, and this chapter is about Jane's relationship and discovery of a small shop in Paris. So, and please forgive my French pronunciations, not good. But on page 53, Jane had a lifetime love affair with secondhand shopping. This had begun during her childhood, as her grandmother and her friends held garage sales to make money for their church to feed those in need in Kansas City. The items for sale came from donations from church members and neighbors. It just so happened that her grandmother, who lived only a block away from her own home, had the only garage in the group, and therefore it was in it that the objects for their frequent sales were stored. Every time there was a sale, young Jane would spend hours carefully perusing the donated wares. She was fascinated by all the different types of clothing and accessories in these donations. Seeing her avid interest, her mom and grandmother would give her a few coins to purchase a couple of items at each sale. Her spirited eyes would literally sparkle as she examined the wide array of objects, especially foreign ones, which she would not have otherwise been exposed to. Where had they come from? What were they used for? What was the story behind each object? Jane's curiosity had been irreversibly piqued. Passing her driving test was a particularly important milestone. This achievement meant that Jane could then travel to sales further afield. She discovered tag sales, flea markets, and estate auctions. At each one, she was always keen to seek out the best bargains. When she moved out of her family's home, got her first place, and was a young professional on a budget, she found many household items at these sales that could be repurposed or painted to look brand new, all for next to nothing. When she started earning a good salary, she used her extra income to travel, first to the Caribbean islands, then to the Far East, and then Europe. No matter the destination, she was always on the hunt for antique stores and flea markets. This was how she developed her love for her favorite European city, Paris. She was simply glowing during her first visit to Les Puces de Saint-Ouen. I think so.
That's all right.
The sprawling flea market on the edge of Paris, the largest secondhand and antiques market in the world. Jane was like a kid in a candy shop browsing its never-ending stalls. As much as she loved the vast bazaar-like market, it was on her third or fourth trip to Paris that she first went to her shop. As she was traveling more and more, Jane also began reading an increasing number of travel guides and magazines to inspire her future trips. In one publication, a specific article caught her eye. It was about a small shop in Paris called Coup de Chance. From the photo included with the article, it looked like just the sort of place she'd adore. Jane carefully clipped out the article and saved it for her next trip to Paris. Jane was curious about what the name meant, so she took out her French-English dictionary. After some digging, she figured out that it translated as a stroke of good luck. However, the E in brackets created a double meaning. By adding an E to the end of the word coup, it became coupe, as in a champagne coupe or glass. This gave a little hint towards the sort of goods sold in the shop. The name also perfectly embodied the experience of secondhand shopping. The best finds always came by a stroke of good luck. It must have been 9 or 10 years ago. Nevertheless, Jane remembered that first visit like it was yesterday. She unfolded the clipping from her pocket to double-check the address written in tiny block letters at the end of the article. Yes, she was on the right street, Rue Babette, in the 3rd arrondissement. But when she arrived at number 7, lucky number 7, she was confronted with a darkened shop front. She cupped her hands round her eyes and peered in through the windows. Yes, it was a spitting image of the photo in the magazine clipping. She leaned back and examined the door. That's when she noticed the Fermé sign.
Thank you very much, Jeannie. That was great. So if we have any other, I'm sure we have some other lovers of vintage items and antiques and who've been to some of these places as well. So you'll have to keep reading yourself to find out what happens, because Jane is a bit of a savior there. Some of you maybe have gotten through that chapter already. So thank you, Jeannie. That was great. Special memories brought to life.
Yes.
I want to finish the reading on a funny note, and so I couldn't resist. So I'm going to just read a short passage of story number 5 on page 96. And so story number 5 takes place on a market street here in Paris called the Rue Mouffetard. And Rue Mouffetard is a great street. You know, a lot of people know Rue Claire and go over there, which is nice, but Rue Mouffetard has a little bit more of a local ambiance to it. And so we have a main character here called Gilles and Philippe. Sorry, I see the word Gilles here. Gilles and Philippe. This is a friendship story, but it's also a romantic story. But for me, above all, it's a story of friendship. because we have poor Philippe and Gilles single too, but it's these kind of young retirees. They're in their mid 60s, and they went through the confinement alone and were a bit lonely. And so afterwards, Gilles had tried online dating and it was successful. So he's encouraged his friend Philippe, they're best buddies since forever, and he encouraged Philippe to set up an online dating profile. But Philippe, who was a retired metro driver, never had to use computers or technology really, and so he's a bit lost. But so this starts when Gilles had already come by and set up the dating profile for Philippe. Just wanted to say hi. We have Zekia who's joined us too, and then we have someone new who's just popped in. Hi there. And then I'm going to, so this is our last little reading, and then we'll open it up to questions, and I'll announce the winner of the contest that Susan's going to help me pick. So page 96 at the top. Gilles was a man of his word, perhaps a little too much so. It seemed like every day he was calling to touch base, which did admittedly come in handy when Philippe forgot his login details, login to the dating site. Gilles taught Philippe how to like profiles he found interesting and gave him some conversation starters, which were not too cheesy or lame. Their efforts started paying off. Philippe had a few chats going, and within 2 weeks, he had his first dates lined up. However, since he was still very new to this, and was learning by trial and error. The first lesson he learned was to not rendezvous at Le Café Mouffetard. All his other regular buddies are still teasing him about his first and only date he brought there. She was a buxom brunette from Brittany, who'd made it known before their drinks had even arrived that she spent most of her Saturday nights at various swingers clubs. That was not what Philippe had in mind when he'd let Gilles add open-minded to his dating profile. His second date was equally disastrous, but for entirely different reasons. Just a second. His second date was equally disastrous, but for entirely different reasons. This time, he wisely suggested meeting at a cafe in Place Monge. This was another lovely square near the Rue Mouffetard, but was far enough away to have altogether different locals. At first sight, he was very charmed by the cute Kiwi who arrived, and then he instantly fell under the charm of her New Zealander accent. However, the only words out of her dainty mouth were gushing praise of her Italian hairdresser, Luciano, who had a salon a few paces away on the Rue Monge. It was nothing but Luciano this and Luciano that. She was obviously infatuated with Luciano il Magnifico. It was true, she had a wonderful haircut, but it seemed like it would take a much bigger weapon than a pair of scissors to release her ties to the Italian stylist. The third time's the charm, right? For a reason he couldn't quite pinpoint, Philippe had a good feeling about this next meetup. There was something familiar about her photo, despite the fact that it was taken from a distance and she was wearing sunglasses. On the given day, as Philippe was approaching the designated meeting point, he stopped dead in his tracks. There, right in front of the entrance to Saint-Médard Church, was her, the lady he saw every day at Le Café Mouffetard. Now he understood why her photo had caught his eye and why she'd suggested meeting in front of this little-known church. She was also from the neighborhood. She was wearing a smart yet relaxed navy blue skirt suit with a burgundy-colored top and had a coordinated silk scarf tied around her neck. Her face lit up when she saw Philippe. This gesture seemed to acknowledge that she too recognized him from their regular cafe. He hoped she hadn't seen him with the swinging Breton, nor heard his friends teasing him about her. So we'll leave it at that, so you can see what happens afterwards in his date. It's, for me, it's the funniest story of the book, but there are a couple other funny stories. I now want to pass it over to you. So if there's anyone who has any questions or comments, or why don't you tell us what your favorite story is? So just kind of raise your hand or just kind of pipe in there. Give us a chance to just converse a little bit, and you can share your impressions of the book so far too. Yeah, Karen.
Lily, did you do the drawings
I
in the
did
book?
drawings too.
They're
Yeah.
delightful. I just love the little drawings, and I think they're magnificent. And
Oh,
I
thank you.
also wanted to say I haven't read all of it yet, but the parts that I did read when I was proofreading, I really liked the story Hidden Plans for the Opera Garnier. That was just really so much fun to read. I enjoyed that one an awful lot.
Oh, thank you. That's great to hear. There are a few stories I think which would make good movies, and that's one of them.
Definitely.
Elaborated on.
Yes.
Glad to hear that. Yeah, Jeannie.
I too enjoyed the Opera Garnier, and it's hard to pick a favorite one because I liked so many of them and so many piece parts. The one about designs, the street artist and his little friend Alex, and I love the Promenade Plantée, and so many because they're just all woven so neatly and beautifully. I hated to come to the end of the book, really.
Oh, sometimes I was rereading them as I was proofing kind of the last time, and I was like, oh, I almost Chaumont keeps bringing little tears. Forget the second story, which is like a tearjerker, but the Boot Chaumont, I felt like I was there with them. So, some of these characters I grew really fond of. Yeah, Robin.
So bravo, Miss Lee. This book is, but your other book's fabulous, but I think this is your best book yet.
Thank
Truly.
you.
It's so different than, the hippy dippy, Instagram, splashy, macaron eating BS, versus really getting into the story of what happened in the pandemic with real people in real places. Not saying here, go this, not your typical tourist book. Yet anybody who's never been to Paris can get a sense of it much better through stories. Because life is about stories.
Yeah.
And this is your best one yet.
Oh, thank you.
So bravo.
Oh, thank you very much, Robin. I appreciate that. Karen said something similar too, so she helped proof the other two books, so she, like you, has read them and knows them well. And this is, it was quite exciting and quite nice. It was a different sort of project because this is all fiction. Besides, some stories are a bit inspired on real people or real things, or I'd be walking down the street and see someone, I'm like, oh, they'd be a great character. And just kind of, invent things. My brother Josh here, Josh, I told him he wanted a mystery, and I'm glad that you all liked the Opera Garnier story because that was partly thanks to Josh. No joke, because this is what happened. I'm like, Josh, we needed a mystery, and I'm like, give me 3 characters, and he gave me these characters, and I just made the story work from there.
But that was also visual. If you have been to Paris, you know where you are, you can sense it, you're just right there. You're walking down that street. And so it was such a vivid narrative. I loved it.
Oh, great. Well, I'm glad because don't forget that was the objective from the beginning exactly was to help bring people to Paris who can't be here right now. And so that was really my objective, but to then see things nice, historic, information, you know, each chapter does have that too. Yeah, Jeannie.
I enjoyed it, but I enjoyed it. I couldn't put it down. I kept reading and reading. It's like just a little bit more. Let me go see. And of course, the thread of Sasha there. It's like, what in the world does she have that he wants so badly? I couldn't wait to get to the very last. So I was reading in the middle of the night because I couldn't put it down. I really enjoyed each one of those stories. They were well done, and reading about the time frame we're going through with the COVID right now, that was also good to weave that in and see how people there are dealing with those same situations as we all are. So thank you very much. This was wonderful. I enjoyed it.
I'm so glad to hear that, and really pleased that you couldn't put it down. And yes, let's not give away what was in the pouch. But if anyone guessed what it could be, put your hand up, because I know Susan thought it was something different, but we won't give it away because it's quite exciting. But it is. You find out, of course, towards the end. I'm not going to tell you where because you need to keep reading, but. Sasha has lost something quite important, and I hope that once you get to the end that you find that it was tied in nicely, so fits in with the story. So yeah, Robin, did you, or maybe she's just typing. Anyone else? Did anyone else want to kind of pass on a comment or tell us your favorite part of the book, or kind of any other commentary that that you thought of? We have Lauren, who was in here earlier, Lauren Scott. She said she's about halfway through and loving the stories, especially all the Easter eggs linking them together. That's cute because you have to find them when you see them. You're like, oh, wait a second, like the bookshop, which comes up a few times. And then Sarah has ordered a copy and is waiting for it to arrive. That's great. So Josh had a question. Where did the inspiration come from to put the links together in the story? And that's a good question. And this kind of, is for you insiders who are here today. And the story idea to link them came up this way, is when I was finishing and I was rereading and re-editing from the start, I was like, oh, the book is a little slow to begin with. And, because the first story of the Louvre is kind of exciting. The others are absolutely lovely. I love them, but they're, a little bit slower paced. And I was like, what's missing? And I was like, maybe I could add a story, even though, I already had all these other ones. And I was thinking just one story. And then I was like, the metro. We have we have one on the banks of the Seine. I was like, why don't we have one on the metro as well? And this is how the idea was sparked. And then I was like, wait a second, there's more here that can be done. And I was like, because that didn't solve the problem that there are these 3 stories that are a bit slow, like just, more thoughtful stories. And I was like, the funny ones are towards the end. And in this like kind of more second half of the book, there are a few funny ones in the first half too, but then the second half, that just kind of happened because I wasn't writing them in order. And that's how I was like, and it took on a life of its own, like I say the metro does. And I was like, wait, and it was really fun and really exciting, and I needed to make it realistic. I really wanted to make it realistic, but poor Sasha, everything that could happen in the metro happens to the poor guy. But what it was is then the metro does link the city together. And so as we're traveling around, we travel around underground first and then we hop up. And so the idea came really naturally, which is how a lot of the stories happen too. So that's a good question. Are there any other questions? Oh, thank you very much, Robin, for popping in. Robin's heading out, and we'll probably wrap things up. So go ahead and ask me any other last questions here, and then I'm going to get Susan's help. We're gonna pick the winner of the contest. We had a little contest, and we're going to have more. Because don't think just because you have the book that you can't win another one to then give to a friend or a signed copy of one of my previous books, because that will always be the choice, as you can pick and choose. And also, if I could just give one little plea, is if you've enjoyed the book and you're finished, if you could write a review, it's always helpful to attract more readers. But just passing the word around, like I know that you're doing, and I know Jeannie has, you can see them in the background there. Jeannie has some she's giving as presents for Christmas, and so if you know, all of that helps. And so thank you very much for your support. So Susan, I would like you to pick a number from 1 to 103, because we had 103 entries to the giveaway contest. So so the first number that comes to your mind, and you're on mute, so you're going to have to unmute yourself. And don't change your mind of the number.
I won't, I promise.
I just do.
The year I graduated high school, 69.
Okay, 69 is the winner. So let's see, I have them in a spreadsheet. Oh, and the winner, I'm sorry, it's nobody here, but it's James McPherson. So I actually have a surprise for you. We're gonna pull 2 names. And so Jeannie, why don't you pick the, Jeannie Mayer, why don't you pick the second winner? And we'll have 2 winners. So one is James, so we'll put his name in bold. So a second number between 1 and 103.
How about 87?
87 is the next winner. Okay, winner in 87 is Phyllis Cartwright. So those are the winners. But thank you for participating, and more importantly, thank you all for coming today and helping me celebrate the launch of the book. So without everyone's energy that you put into it, this wouldn't have been possible, and there'd be more fun contests coming up. So again, you can participate in, because those of you who have the book, the contests are going to be easier. So we have those contests coming up. So once again, thank you for everything. This has been a great adventure, and like some of you said, you didn't want it to end. Well, if this goes well, there could be a part 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, and of course then COVID doesn't have to be involved. But let's find a different theme, and then you can share more of your love of Paris through different stories. All right, thank you, everyone.
Congratulations, Lily. Great
Thank
job.
you, Lily. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Lily.
Bye-bye.
Take care.